Thank you very much for being here this evening. Most of you are probably familiar with the Conservancy already, but just a brief introduction, a short plug. We're a nonprofit group that preserves archaeological sites on private land across the United States, with about 600 sites in our care currently. Lots of work, always busy. My name is Tracy Lowe. I'm the editor of American Archaeology and managing the digital outreach efforts of the Conservancy. With us tonight is April Brown. She's our regional, Southwestern Regional Director. I got her right when she turned her camera off. Sorry about that, April. She manages about 150 of our Conservancy sites in the Southwestern region. Our Special Projects Director and Office Manager, Sarah Weber, is with us also this evening. They'll be providing me some tech support as I guide this webinar through its completion. And our guest of honor is Dr. Shane Doyle, who's joining us this evening, a Montana-based scholar and Crow consultant, and he's the executive director of Yellowstone Peoples, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to revitalizing tribal culture in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem and providing opportunity for youth through the establishment of a permanent annual intertribal teepee village in Yellowstone National Park. Dr. Doyle also serves on our board of directors for the Conservancy, so we're really delighted to have him here tonight presenting and sharing his knowledge with us. Thank you so much for being here. Shane's presentation will be about half an hour, which will give us about 20-25 minutes for questions. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen or on our Facebook live stream comments. And we'll circle back at the end to get as many of the questions as we can. And again, we'll wrap up by 6 tonight. So if we don't get to every question, we can always reach out to you later. You can view the webinar on YouTube and just feel free to reach out to any of us anytime with further questions. With that being said, Shane, I will turn it over to you. We'll turn our cameras off and you can share your presentation and jump right in.
Son, thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. It's a great honor to have this opportunity to speak to everyone here that tunes into the Archaeological Conservancy. It's an honor to serve on the board as well. And so I'm just going to start my PowerPoint presentation I have here. And pardon me if you hear any extra noises. I'm actually in the back of a theater here in Bozeman, Montana, the Rialto Theater. I'm getting ready to do a live presentation just at 6 o'clock. So I'm kind of double booked here, but I'm happy to make time for this. And so again, my name is Dr. Shane Doyle. I am from the Crow Indian Reservation, and it's about a 3-hour drive from Bozeman. It's along the Little Bighorn River. So I grew up just about a mile from the Battle of the Little Bighorn, actually. And my parents, my stepdad and my mom, lived on the battlefield for about 25 years. So, and my sister continues to live there. So a lot of his history coursing through my veins, and of course in Montana here. And a lot of the history is recent. And so I just wanted to let's see, share some of my experiences here with you, give you a preview of some of the slides that you're going to be looking at here. And one of the areas that I've really tried to learn more about and share with the public more about is the Yellowstone Park. And growing up, and even as a graduate student, I learned very little about the tribal history in the park. And so it's been a real treat and a real great pleasure to find out there's so much to learn there in the Yellowstone Park about the Native history. And so this first slide, you see a couple of photographs. These photographs were from the summer of 2022, when it was 150th anniversary of Yellowstone Park. And we had a lighted and illuminated teepee display set up in Gardner, as you see here in the top photograph. And then underneath it, you see that was our teepee village, our intertribal teepee village that had 13 lodges set up. And there were ambassadors from 13 different nations that call Yellowstone their homeland. And we just had a good time sharing our history, our culture with the public and with each other. And so going forward, that event was such a great success that we really wanted to make it an annual event. And so henceforth, that was the start of this new nonprofit, Yellowstone Peoples. And again, as was mentioned at the start there, as Tracy mentioned, our goal is to have an annual intertribal teepee village in the Yellowstone Park where we educate youth and mentor them with tribal elders to learn about the park and the many opportunities they have to be involved with it as in terms of their career opportunities. I guess I didn't choose the right texture, and I think I changed it towards the right before I was getting ready to present. But I have some articles here that I've written. I've written about a dozen articles about Yellowstone over the past 4 or 5 years, and there's if you look me up in Google Yellowstone and my name, you'll find quite a few of them. And some of the stuff I'll share with you here, but these are just a few of the links. The Land of Steam was an article I wrote for the National Parks Conservation Association, um, commemorating Yellowstone's 150th birthday with the park's first family. That was another blog article I wrote for the NPCA. And then Making Meaning in Medicine in the Land of the Burning Ground. That's an article I wrote for the Mountain Outlaw. And so in that article, I look at 10 different place names in the Yellowstone Park and kind of synthesize and analyze the meaning behind those names and try and make sense of what was happening there for hundreds, thousands of years. So moving forward, I just wanted to start off, or I guess introduce my topic here by saying that I'm not going to speak entirely about archaeology. And if you really want to go in depth about the archaeology in Yellowstone Park, there was a book that came out a few years back, right about the same time as the 150th anniversary, and that is a book by Dr. Doug McDonald. He's at the University of Montana, and that book is Before Yellowstone. And in that book, you'll find all kinds of maps about the different excavations and all the different sites that have been identified there, and there are a lot. There are many, many. You'll kind of be stunned at how many there are, and that probably just scratches the surface, you know. But in the book, Doug mentions that the most important archaeological site in the Yellowstone Park is Obsidian Cliff, and I think it's probably the most ar important archaeological site on the Great Plains and on the Northern Plains because it connects uh, to the entire continent. And it's been shown that Yellowstone obsidian has been traded and taken pretty much everywhere in North America, in what we call the United States. In fact, hundreds of pounds have been recovered in Ohio in the Hopewellian Mounds. And so we know that if hundreds of pounds have been recovered, there's likely thousands of pounds that are still somewhere in the ground. Um, and because typically in archaeology, we only scratch the surface, find just a small amount of what's out there. So anyway, I just want to again give some give some credit to Dr. Doug McDonald. He's a great researcher, scholar, and appreciate the work that he's done in and around the Greater Yellowstone. My work in the Greater Yellowstone really kind of got in depth back in 2014 when I helped with the rematriation of an ancient Clovis child, um, and that was known as the Anzac child. And you can see from this map here that there's a burial site. Can you guys hear that music? I'm just a minute here. I'm going to see if they can actually turn it down for a second. Okay, sorry about that. Um, okay, so this little map here identifies the burial site of the Anzac Clovis child. And so he was an infant, a a toddler who died 12,600 years ago, and his remains were accidentally uncovered in 1968 by some construction workers, and he wasn't really known. There was no DNA back in those days to find out who he was. So in 2014, we found out through DNA sequencing that he's the ancestor to pretty much every Native American in the Western Hemisphere. And all of that is about a day's walk from the Yellowstone National Park. The Anzac site is located just about 60 miles from the entrance to the park. I say a day's walk because back in those days, those people could cover some ground. Um, these were like extreme athletes. But here's a few images from the Anzac reburial, the Anzac site itself, located in the Shields River Valley, situated between the Crazy Mountains and the Bridger Mountains. And you can see the some of the Clovis points and other artifacts that were recovered from the Anzac burial here in this image. Mostly Clovis points there. Some of the elkhorn antlers are also there. And then in this image below here, where you see the people kind of feasting on woolly mammoth. So that image came from the cover of a edition of Science magazine that was published in January. And in that study, the isotopes of the Anzac child were examined, and the researchers were able to determine that 40% of the calories that the boy consumed came from woolly mammoth. And so that was a startling revelation. I think now we have definitive proof that these Clovis people were primarily hunting and subsisting off woolly mammoth, and that that's one of the reasons and that they were able to make their way across the continent as they did, and just really proliferate in all four corners. So it's quite a story. The Anzac child, again, after all these years, we're still uncovering new things about him, and the mammoth story is quite a interesting twist in all of it, I think. And there had been, I think, a lot of uh, researchers and theorists believe that Native people hunted woolly mammoth, and that was a big part of their economy. But there was still, I think, a lot of skepticism, and it was an unproven theory. But after this study, I think, you know, we can assume now that this is how these people were surviving. Um, Now I want to circle back to my childhood growing up in the Yellowstone region. And one of the very first ancient artifacts that I was introduced to by my uncle, my family, was the Bighorn medicine wheel, which is located in the Bighorn Mountains. Again, just about a day's drive, not a walk, but more like a drive from the Yellowstone National Park. But it's in the same region. And so it's oftentimes referred to as Big Sky Country, Montana. Um, and because of the Great Plains and the view of the sky that we have here 24 hours a day, it just makes it a great place to view the sky. And so the medicine wheel, I think, has always been viewed as an astronomical scientific tool by researchers, but in fact, it also represents a lot of other things, a cultural nexus. It's a calendar. It's a three-dimensional map, not only of the stars, but also of the landscape. It can be used as a tool to direct people in their travels. And it's also the source of the sacred Sundance ceremony. And so you see in the image at the bottom here, taken about 100 years ago, uh, up on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, some men getting prepared for an Okan, again, a version of the Blackfeet Sundance. And every tribe on the Great Plains where these medicine wheels are found, and there's been over 100 of these medicine wheels identified on the northern plains, wherever we find them, the tribes that are associated with that region have a Sundance ceremony that they utilize. And that's one of the primary identifiers, cultural identifiers of that area. And as soon as you start to, um, you know, get out of that region and you don't see the medicine wheels anymore, you'll see that those ceremonial ways of life and the music and everything else is just different. So there's a lot of, I guess, cultural nexus associated with the medicine wheel and very closely associated with the Yellowstone Park. And we know that Montana and the Great Plains and over into Idaho, here in the plateau, uh, Native people have been living here, hunting, gathering, and trading for over 13,000 years. A lot of times we only refer to the hunting and gathering, but I think the trading is probably the most important thing that they did. Um, they of course had to feed and clothe themselves and shelter, but learning, gaining knowledge from their neighbors, trading, not only textiles and other tools and other items, but also, again, songs, ceremonies. There was a huge trade culture, a cosmopolitan trade culture here on the Northern Plains surrounding the Yellowstone Park. I think the Yellowstone Park was the nexus point through which all those tribes traveled, whether it was east or west of the Continental Divide. Um, and they all knew this language so that they could trade, they could speak with one another. They were constantly every year uh, mingling with each other. And so they had this language that was a necessity. And I think the other thing that I want to really emphasize is that around America, if you look at across the continent, when corn, beans, and squash gets introduced about 2,000 years ago, it takes about 1,000 years or so, but by about 1,000 years ago, that's a staple economy across anywhere in the eastern and southeastern USA and even Southwest. People were growing crops as their primary means of feeding themselves. Of course, they supplemented with hunting. But here in the Northern Plains, it was just such a difficult thing to do that most tribes abandoned that opportunity or the prospects of it because it was a pretty risky gamble to try and grow crops here in Montana when you had other wild plants and other wild animals that you could rely upon. Here's another little map that I wanted to share. This map was compiled over the course of decades, probably 50, 60 years it took to compile this map, and it's still growing. It's not finished. This is one version of the map. And you see the little red squiggly lines there. This is the Paradise Valley, and that river flowing through there is the Yellowstone River as it leaves the Yellowstone Park and flows towards Livingston, Montana, and then out onto the Great Plains, onto the northern prairie. And what you're seeing there with these red lines, these are Buffalo Drive lines that have been identified by archaeologists over the years. And there's over 70 miles of these lines here that they've been added up, the length and all of it. 70 miles worth of rock walls, basically. And those rock walls were kind of essentially guardrails that kept the bison in a straight or in a contoured line towards a place where they could be harvested in the most efficient and proficient way. And so there's no other place that we know of on the planet that has this kind of architecture that was designed specifically to harvest large game ungulates. And part of the reason is because buffalo behave so differently from other animals. They don't operate on fear. They never get afraid. Um, they are curious. They they have a lot of different personality aspects to them that allowed them to be manipulated, I guess, and kind of in some ways ranched. Um, and so the buffalo drive lines, as we start to really analyze them, we find that the newer the drive lines uh, are the most recent drive lines direct the bison to run alongside the cliff instead of over the cliff. And the reason is because if the bison run alongside the cliff, the lead cow survives and she maintains her leadership uh, position, and the herd maintains its continuity and its integrity so that it continues its same patterned behavior. And so if that lead cow is killed during the drive uh, when they're going over the cliff, then the bison are no longer predictable, and it takes a while for them to find a new leader. They're traumatized, and their behavior is going to become diffuse, and it's going to be much more difficult to continue to have a patterned hunting style that you want to utilize. So anyway, I just want to point that out because again, the significance of that site there is that that's one of the most important bison hunting sites, not just one of the most important hunting sites, period. Not just bison hunting sites, but hunting sites that we know of in the world. And it's just outside the Yellowstone Park. Most of those drive lines are younger than 1,000 years. So within the past 500 or so years. Okay, have a lot of ground that I want to cover here, so you have a few questions, but I want to flash forward now to the other research that I've been doing over the past 7 years, and that's up in the Beartooth Mountains with the ancient ice patches up there. And so there are ancient ice patches in the Beartooth Mountains that are as old as 10,000 years. And we've discovered that native people spent an enormous amount of time up there historically, spent entire seasons up there hunting, gathering. And I think that was another revelation that most researchers would not have predicted that at 10,000 feet in the air, in the Yellowstone ecosystem, that there would have been that size of a population and the traces that they left behind, the tools, the drive lines. It's just really remarkable how much activity was going on up there. And again, that's part of the Greater Yellowstone, and it's even higher than what we know of as, the typical Yellowstone Park caldera area. So, pretty amazing. Some of the images from the ice patches. Here you see Dr. Craig Lee holding an atlatl dart, a 10,000-year-old atlatl dart. That's the oldest artifact ever recovered from an ice patch outside the Arctic. And it was found back in, I want to say 2015. There's a replica that's been made of it. And so it was used to hunt large game animals up there on the Beartooth Plateau, and it was recovered from a melting ice patch. And here in the other photograph, you see a team of researchers drilling through the ice patch to do some core sampling. Um, these ice patches are continuing to shrink because of our warming climate, and we're hoping that we can learn as much from them as possible, and hopefully that their melting can be mitigated somehow. But it's definitely speeding up. And then finally, I have this map here because I want to circle back to the more of the ancient tribal history in Yellowstone Park and the ancient tribal perspective of the Yellowstone Park. This is a map from 1801, and it comes from the journal of a French fur trapper named Peter Fiddler. And he gained all this information from a Blackfoot chief named Feathers. And so the map that you're looking at here covers 250,000 square miles. And so it's the largest map that we know of that's ever been recorded straight from an oral tradition onto a legible, um, recording piece of paper, if you will, or any kind of surface. So what the map is identifying through the middle here, going horizontally across the page, these two lines here represent the continental divide. And these letters here across the edge here are the highest points along the divide that can be easily identified from travelers as you travel along the Great North Trail. This here is the Missouri River, this line coming through the middle here. And all these rivers are tributaries of the Missouri. This is the Bighorn River in Wyoming, central Wyoming. And this is the Marias River up here in Canada. Over west of the divide, you see the Snake River, again, which starts in the Yellowstone Park, flows westward, and then the Columbia, originating further north on the Continental Divide, but still flowing to the west. And then all the information that you see written along the rivers here and in the footnotes are the information about the names of the tribes, uh, the number of people in each community, the night's travel between each community. This map also identifies the island mountain ranges and places where there's areas to graze and horses or harvest bison. So this map is chock full of information, not only geographic but ethnographic, and it's a useful map. But the final point that I want to make about it, and we could talk about it for a very long time and do a whole class on this one map, is that when the map was drawn, the guy who asked for the map, Peter Fiddler, was living up here where my cursor is at in Canada, east of the Continental Divide. And his fort was set up right here at the confluence of the Red Deer and Saskatchewan rivers. And I think it's so interesting when this Blackfeet chief came in, when Peter Fiddler asked him to describe the area, instead of starting from the middle here and describing all around in the four directions, he actually basically drew a map of Montana and Idaho and told Peter Fiddler that this is where everybody lived because this is where all the rivers were at, and this is where the island mountain ranges to harvest teepee poles were at, and this is where the buffalo were at, and there was a whole trade cosmopolitan, as I said, network going on here in Montana and along these rivers. And at the center of it all was the Yellowstone Park. If you'll notice that right in the center of this map, that's the Yellowstone Park, because that's where the Missouri River starts, that's where the Snake River starts, that's where the Yellowstone River starts, and everything flows into them. So yeah, I guess I'll stop for there for now and to take some questions. And let's see, do I go ahead and press stop share? Is that how I do this? I'm not sure. I can leave this map up for people who want to take a look at it, but
Yeah, you could leave the map up for a minute or just stop sharing. Either one works fine.
yeah, sure, I'll leave it up for a moment. It's legible if you look closely. I mean, I could blow it up a little bit. It's kind of hard to read, but um, You can see his name right here, Peter Fiddler. And then
Oh,
you can
nice.
see, yeah, 1801. And I think this was February 7th. And you can see Blackfoot Chief, 1801. So there are definitely some legible aspects to it, but I've had a hard time kind of, reading some of these smaller words. And uh, I needed to have it digitized, or maybe I should ask AI to read it for me and see what it comes up with.
Oh, yeah. The handwrite or the yeah, the handwriting, it's immaculate. It's very nice.
Isn't it
All right.
amazing that this map is from 1801?
Yeah, that it's a really great document. I'm glad you got a bigger version of it than I saw the other day because you can actually see it and read it a little better here. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Yep, yep.
Well, we do have a couple of questions. One here from Tom Marceau. He says it was a doctoral student of Dr. Gary Wright in Yellowstone and Teton National Parks in the 70s. And
Mhm.
he wants to know if their research, if you're familiar with it, and if it's influenced your work at all in these areas.
Great question. I'm always looking for more research, and I'm not familiar with that. I believe the name rings a bell, but I need to get a hold of that document and read it. It's so important to keep searching and reaching out and communicating because a little bit of backstory about my understanding of Yellowstone Park. I knew very little about it. And I was asked to teach a class there about the Crow tribe. And as part of the Yellowstone Institute back before it became Yellowstone Forever. And I told them I don't think I can teach a class. I don't know enough about it. And they said, "Oh, well, we've got a bunch of material for you."
Oh,
And luckily for me, uh, Tim McCleary, who was a professor at Little Bighorn College, had been gathering materials for just such a course and had actually taught the course a couple of years, but then decided he wanted to turn it over to a Crow Indian. And that material that he prepared was just astonishing in its scope and its breadth. I mean, oral traditions, oral histories that from the prehistory time right up to the 19th century, uh, origin stories about how and why the geothermal features were created and how they're connected to the heavenly bodies. And so these are the stories that we want to get out to the public in the teepee village and whatever research Mr. Wright did, I would love to make that also part of the canon. I think when you go to the Yellowstone Park now, I think everyone will agree that you really don't learn too much about the tribes there from either the signage or the brochures, or even if you go into like the local museums there's not a lot of information. And so we're led to believe that it's kind of a spot that's not really all that significant, when in fact just the opposite is true. So I'm very thankful for all the research that has been done over the years. We're still utilizing it. We're still trying to find ways to, make that research relevant and bring it to the public. And we're going to do it over the years. Myself, the Yellowstone Peoples, Yellowstone Forever, the nonprofit fundraising hand of the Yellowstone National Park. They're committed to bringing a greater Native voice to the Yellowstone Park, and we're partnering with them. And so we have a lot of plans for the future. And, you know, the dream, the vision is that the Yellowstone Park will be a place where we don't just learn about the geothermal features, but we learn about the human condition as well. And a lot of the same reasons why people were going to the Yellowstone Park all those years ago are the same reasons we still go today. They're really not that much different. We're going there to renew ourselves. We're going there to experience a place that is magical and mysterious. Um, we're going there to find solace in nature in a way that we can't find in other places. So, yeah, I just think that please pass along. your research, and I will add that to the list of things that we need to get out to the public.
That ties in really well, actually, to a question that I had. You touched on it briefly, which is the modern stewardship of Yellowstone. How can it better incorporate Indigenous perspectives, traditional knowledge, and how do you see that public understanding of Native history in Yellowstone evolving?
Yes, so that is a priority for the Yellowstone Park. It's a priority for the nonprofit branch, like I said, Yellowstone Forever. And it first starts with partnering with tribes, I think. And so that takes outreach. And that's what I've been, a part of for pretty much my entire career is connecting with tribal communities, tribal governments. I work on behalf of a lot of nonprofit organizations, and universities, and government agencies. And so I'm in a good position to really coalesce tribal representatives to do this kind of work. And having the teepee village gives us an opportunity to record histories and tribal stories, not just about the Yellowstone Park, but about the Greater Yellowstone and about the Medicine Wheel country that's really kind of the periphery of the Greater Yellowstone region. And I think as we move forward, we'll continue to find the resources to have more uh, public knowledge provided. One of the things that my group is doing is, or planning, is we have an app in the works, a Yellowstone People's app that will provide a lot of information, traditional stories, what have you, from all the tribes associated with the park, and with original documents like this map that we're looking at here, that can provide a whole new glimpse into this history that really no one knows about. And if I could just take one moment to follow up on that, I would say that as a scholar myself, uh, I found it really, um, I guess, frustrating to study, getting my master's degree in Native American Studies. And the reason why it was frustrating was because I could only go as far back as Lewis and Clark here in Montana. And then at that point, there was really nothing. The only other source that I had to turn to was either oral traditions or archaeology, because there was really nothing written about it. And there hadn't really been anyone to synthesize and analyze the cultural artifacts that we have today, like sign language and the songs and these trade networks that were established, and to say this is the history before Lewis and Clark. And so I think that that's where I kind of found my niche, or if you will, or my area of interest, was this white spot on the map that really hadn't been explored because nothing had been written at the time. And I think when you're speaking about, Western academia, if years and years or centuries go by and an event has happened and nothing's been written about it, uh, from an academic perspective, I think it's pretty far-fetched for anyone to try and say anything substantial or substantive about that because there's just been too much time that has gone by. I think that's been the general rule of thumb, if you will. But in fact, I would disagree with that as well. I would say that we have a lot, just go to a powwow today and you'll see, wow, how come all these Indians are singing the same songs? They all have a different language. How is it that they learned these songs together? I mean, there's something going on here. Just that one aspect. And, we could go on and on, but again, the Yellowstone Park has to be the place where this kind of knowledge is shared because it's a shared landscape. And it's also the kind of landscape that was mostly uninhabited during the winter. And so it's a seasonal place and it's Um, it has that essential quality to it that makes it a part of all these people's yearly patterns. I'm not saying that it's not important, but they didn't stay there in the winter. So it's a shared landscape, and that makes it even more, I guess, appropriate to share this kind of ancient cultural perspective.
I have a question here from archaeologist Joseph Wetzelman, who asks, what is the farthest back in time the Clovis culture has been found in that area? And specifically, do you know if Ranger Pool has been investigated further to discover if the dam was made by indigenous tribes or the army? You familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with that pool. Mm-mm. No, what I can say is that the earliest evidence that we have, is the Anzac Clovis site, and that's located along the Shields River. It's about 30 miles from Livingston, and Livingston is about, probably 45 miles from Gardner. Um, and that's really where the park entrance is at. So it's pretty clear that people were all around there from the very beginning. I think 12,600 years ago, most of Yellowstone was still under ice. And I think that uh, as it began to thaw, that was the first place people went. I think they went there because that's where the animals went, because that's where the river was coming from. Uh, the wind that blows through there was what brought the migrating animals up the valley. And it was just a great spot for hunter-gatherers.
Well, I have a question related to the Anzac child. While you're on that topic, could you speak a little about the conversations between descendant communities and researchers regarding the Anzac child and subsequent research, and what was the tribal perspective in that situation?
Yeah, I think there was a varied tribal perspective. There wasn't one outlook on it all. I think back when the study was done, the tribal historic preservation officers were all felt like they uh, had, these folks had done the study behind their backs and that they didn't consult with them. They didn't bring them into the study at all. They just kind of did the study. And then once they found out the kid was Indian, then they had no choice but to go to the Indians and tell them, oh yeah, by the way, we did this study and guess what? You're probably related to this guy. And so that I think was a bad look, if you will. But what was good about the whole thing was that the research team was um, coming to the tribes from a perspective of goodwill and wanting to somehow, ameliorate whatever kind of, you know, I guess infraction they felt like they may have made. And I don't think there was really any hard feelings between the researchers and the tribal communities. I think there was just a sense of maybe unease. But then the research team decided that they wanted to rematriate the remains, and that set off a whole chain of events that took about, oh gosh, about 9 months. So we started the rematriation in September, and then the uh, the the remains of the boys were reburied in June the next year. And I think that made everybody feel really good that we all agreed on that. It was not easy. There were a lot of different opinions about where the boy should be reinterred and how he should be reinterred. And we worked it all out. There were all the historic preservation officers from Montana were involved with that process. And then that was plenty. I think we could have involved the Idaho tribes as well and Wyoming, but there are already 13 tribes in Montana and 7 reservations, and so we're the most tribally diverse state in the region. And so it worked out that way. And then now today, um, I sit on the doctoral committee of a researcher up in Browning, a young lady, a Blackfeet researcher who is finishing up her PhD, doing the study on the Blackfeet genome. So she gathered blood from 100 Blackfeet tribal members, and she's sequencing their genomes. So this is a first in Indian country in Montana, and it'll be interesting to see if the tribe or if she decides to use that data and compare it to the Anzac data to see how closely related the Blackfeet are to the Anzac. I think, that's one of the things that the research team in Denmark that I worked with was always wanting to find out, but we could never find out because the tribes had never been sequenced here in Montana. Only the tribes in South America and Mexico. But now that the Blackfeet have done it, and I think we're going to see some good things come from it, we'll see the other tribes, there'll be more interest in it. And I think it's just a matter of time before the other tribes are also sequenced because there's other things at stake as well. There's diseases to consider, there's safety from all different kinds of viewpoints. And we're the last population really on the planet that hasn't been sequenced. Pretty much every other group on the planet has been identified and sequenced and is in some kind of database. So that's another kind of twist on this whole thing.
We have a question from Jeremy Sivitz from Minnesota, who
Hmm.
is asking if you know what species of wood the atlatl dart found in Beartooth Ice Patch is made of.
Good question. I'm assuming that it's probably chokecherry. I don't think I ever found out, but most of those darts were all hardwood, and almost all the hardwood from Montana was chokecherry. Chokecherry is just really important plant here in Montana, not just for the berries, but for the wood. And like on teepees, when you see the pins that go above the door, those are all chokecherry. And almost any kind of hardwood, um, it's just easy to find. It's easy to work with. Uh, you see a lot of arrows. Sometimes they use willows as well, but probably not so much with the atlatl. But I know they use them with arrows that the Crow Indians throw, the kind that are thrown. But those are more for just for sport, not really for hunting. Um, but the Crow Indians still have arrow throwing games today. Even today, they still have them during the summer. And the wood that they use there, it depends on who makes the arrows. Um, but they have a process through which they straighten the arrows too. And all that is kind of like sacred oral tradition knowledge that they don't really make public or really share unless someone wants to be apprenticed to make arrows. So yeah, arrow making is a real ancient, sacred, important thing, and it's really tricky. I'll say that too because I'm glad you brought that up because to get an arrow perfectly straight, you have to make it perfectly straight if it's going to fly true. You can't have any kind of a bend or warp in it. I mean, think about how many branches are perfectly straight. I mean, there's not that many. You have to find some that are going to be imperfect, and you have to have strategies that you can utilize to straighten that branch, that stick. So there's just really a lot of knowledge, and I think a lot of it, of course, if it's not used and passed on frequently, then it's lost. And I think you could chalk that up to the art of arrowhead making. I would say flint knapping is one of those lost arts in native communities. And it was probably lost, honestly, in the 19th century because the native people started turning to easier tools when the new economy started flowing in. And And another example of that would be pro pottery. My tribe, we're Plains Indians, but when we came to Montana, we came from the Great Lakes region, from the Mississippi Mountains region, and we were potters. We had clay pots that we used all the time, and we had this like recipe that of making our clay that was really superior. It kind of shimmered and just amazing. But when we started riding horses, we quit using pots because, the quickest way to break a pot is get up on a horse and tie it to the back and start running around. It's not going to last. And so they switched to parfleche. And I don't know anyone in the Crow community that knows how to make a pot or has ever known of anyone that knows how to make a pot. So the oral traditions can change in a hurry. But yeah, good question. Thank you.
I have a couple of technical questions about this map, which I had these questions myself. Um,
Yeah,
when you blew the map up, it's really great to see it better.
yeah,
1801 was the date, Michelle. She asked if 1801 was the date the map was made, but
yeah.
when and where was it found? And can is there a digital version that we could see and enlarge? Like I could share a link to it or something?
Oh yeah, there's this map has been studied. I wrote a paper about it. I have an article published through Distinctly Montana magazine, but it was only like 1,000 words, or I can't remember, 1,200 words. So I didn't write a whole lot about it, but there have been other papers about this map. It's it's the Fiddler map, Feathers map. The other name that Feathers had is White Swan. The map, I believe, is in a museum in Canada. It's either in Canada or in London. I know it's still, available to the public. And um, you, like I said, there have been a lot of studies and people have broken it down in a lot of from a lot of different angles. But you can see right here, drawn by the feathers or Akomaki, Akomakia, Blackfoot Chief, 7th of February, 1801. So the other thing that got me was, wow, he came in February of 1801. It must have been pretty cold in Canada, and I'm sure
That's
there
pretty
was
cool.
snow on the ground, so he probably drew this map in the snow. Um,
That's impressive.
yeah, I think um, so. I did a presentation on this map a couple years ago, and to a GIS, or yeah, it was a GIS group, and one of the guys in there found a copy and blew it up and put it on the wall in his office. He said, "Yeah, you should come and look at the map sometime. I really want to go in there and look at it sometime." But yeah, there's a lot to learn from this. Um, some of the biggest questions are, how did he know all that? And did he go all that? Did he go all that place by himself, or um, did he learn it from somebody else? I mean, there's the
Can
questions go
you
on.
can you repeat what you said yesterday about the putting ourselves at the center of a map versus how this map is constructed?
Yeah, absolutely. The where the map was drawn is up here on the far right hand side of your screen. Um, you can see where these two rivers intersect. This is the Red Deer this is the Red Deer and Saskatchewan rivers. And you can see it says Chesterfield House. See that? Chesterfield House. That was his fort. You can see he drew the fort with a little flag on it. See that? Okay, this is where the map was drawn. But what's so interesting, whoops, what's so, I guess, interesting about all that is that, if any of us had been asked to draw a map for someone, And Peter Fiddler said, "Can you draw me a map of the area?" But he didn't draw a 360-degree map from the Chesterfield house. He told Peter Fiddler, "Everything that you want to know about all the Indians you want to trade with, they're all to the south. They're all along these rivers that go into the one big river, the Missouri. And if you want to go across the mountains, there is no river that goes across the mountains." He was telling him, "Look, there's only rivers on either side." So right there, he's telling him, what Lewis and Clark were trying to find, this Northwest Passage. He's telling them there is none, and so I thought, well, this must be like the center of everything here, because even though they were up here, he wasn't all that interested in anything north. And if you look at the historic, uh, you know, territories of these tribes, they weren't up into Canada or into Wyoming. They were here in Montana, and they were along the tributaries of the Missouri because of these little island mountain ranges where they could find the teepee poles and the fresh water and the plants, the animals, the ceremonial sites. Sherman Alexie, the famous author, once said that Montana is the Mecca for Native Americans. And at the time when he said that, I understood what he meant, but I didn't really know why. But now, after years and years, I've finally begun to understand that it's because of the landscape here and the things that it had to offer for bison hunters and traders. And all of those, those perfect elements created this situation for this language to proliferate, this sign language, which you don't find anywhere else either. And that's another really unique feature of the whole landscape. And it's connected to the Yellowstone Park, um, very closely. And
Yeah.
and from there it spread across the continent. So yeah, it's covered a lot of ground, but
Yes, thank you. And it's already time to hop off. So, just really quickly, we
yeah,
have a few questions that didn't get
sure.
answered and comments that didn't get output. But and our longtime archaeologist, Alice Kehoe, and I hope I didn't say your name wrong, says that Aki Moki's name was Old Swan, referring
Yes.
to the trumpeter swan that is more powerful and knowing than any other animal. So I think that's a beautiful way
Mm,
to wrap it up.
mm.
And so,
Good
and
words.
she and some others have some questions for you, and wondering if we can share an email address or a best way to
Of
contact
course.
you.
Absolutely, yes. My email address is Shane Mr. Doyle at Yahoo, and it's all lowercase. Um, and my whole life goes through email, so I will get you back.
Okay,
But
great.
happy to answer any questions. Thank you for taking time this evening. It's really great to be with everybody, and keep up the great work, everybody.
Thank you so much. Really great to see you, Shane. And I shared your email address in the chat,
Oh,
so
cool.
everybody can grab it from there. This webinar will be online on our YouTube page tomorrow for anybody that missed it, or if you want to share it, or Shane, you just want to watch it again. Um, I know you have time for that. Thanks so much and
Of
enjoy your
course.
next presentation. Thank you, everybody, for attending and have a good night.
Yep, yep. Take care, everybody.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
Shane.